The crystal chandeliers above the grand Ashcroft ballroom shimmered like frozen stars, casting rivers of golden light across polished marble floors. Every table sparkled with silver cutlery and imported flowers flown in that morning. The city's wealthiest families drifted through the room in custom gowns and tailored tuxedos, their laughter floating above the soft orchestra. At the center of it all stood Evelyn Carter. She wore a simple emerald dress that looked elegant without trying too hard. It wasn't covered in diamonds or designed by a famous fashion house. She had chosen it because it reminded her of her late mother's favorite color. She knew it wasn't enough for tonight. Across the ballroom, her mother-in-law, Margaret Whitmore, watched her with the smile of someone preparing a performance. Margaret was the queen of high society. Every charity committee, museum board, and political fundraiser seemed to revolve around her approval. She had spent 30 years building the Whitmore name into something people whispered with admiration. To Margaret, reputation was worth more than money, and Evelyn had never been worthy of either. Margaret gently tapped her champagne glass. The room fell silent. Ladies and gentlemen, she announced gracefully, before we begin tonight's charity auction, I'd like to thank everyone for supporting the Whitmore Foundation. Polite applause filled the room. Margaret continued, "Our family has always believed that excellence isn't inherited by accident." She paused. "It must be protected." Her eyes slowly found Evelyn, which is why choosing the right people to join a family is incredibly important. A few guests exchanged uncomfortable glances. Others leaned closer. They sensed entertainment. Margaret smiled sweetly. "My son Daniel has always had a generous heart. Sometimes," she sighed dramatically, "too generous." Soft laughter echoed. Daniel shifted beside Evelyn. Mother. Margaret ignored him. "Some people arrive at our table carrying nothing but hope." More laughter. "And while hope is admirable," she slowly looked Evelyn up and down, "it isn't an asset." The ballroom erupted. Not everyone laughed loudly. Some covered their smiles behind crystal glasses. Others pretended to look away while enjoying every second. Evelyn stood perfectly still. Inside, every word landed like a stone. She remembered another ballroom 20 years earlier. Not this one. A school gym decorated with paper flowers. Her mother had worked double shifts just to buy Evelyn a dress for graduation. "It doesn't matter what people think you're wearing," her mother had whispered while adjusting the zipper. "It matters whether you can stand straight while wearing it." Evelyn inhaled quietly. She lifted her chin. No tears. Not here. Margaret wasn't finished. "I've always believed charity begins at home." She reached into her designer handbag. And speaking of charity, she placed an envelope onto Evelyn's dinner plate. "I've prepared something to help you." Daniel's face turned pale. "Mother, stop." Margaret smiled. "It's merely a shopping voucher." She turned back toward the audience. For someone still learning what sophistication looks like. The laughter became louder than before. Even the orchestra hesitated. Evelyn slowly picked up the envelope. Inside wasn't a shopping voucher. It was a gift certificate to a budget department store. $25. She folded it carefully. Then she smiled. "Thank you." Margaret blinked. That wasn't the reaction she'd wanted. "I appreciate every gift," Evelyn said calmly. "My parents taught me never to measure generosity by its price." Silence spread through the ballroom. Several guests looked down. Margaret's smile tightened. "How touching." Daniel reached for Evelyn's hand beneath the table. "I'm sorry." She squeezed his fingers gently. "You didn't do this." But someone noticed something unusual. Across the room, an elderly banker named Charles Bennett watched Evelyn with quiet curiosity. Unlike everyone else, he wasn't watching Margaret. He was studying Evelyn. Not because of what she said, because of what she didn't. She never defended herself. She never begged for acceptance. People who remained calm under humiliation often possess something dangerous. Discipline. Charles made a mental note. Meanwhile, Margaret accepted congratulations from guests who praised her wit. One woman whispered, "You certainly know how to put people in their place." Margaret smiled proudly. She believed she had won. She had no idea the evening was only beginning. After the gala ended, the Whitmore family returned to their sprawling ancestral estate. The mansion looked magnificent from the outside. Towering columns, perfect gardens, imported stone, generations of portraits lined the walls. It appeared untouchable, but appearances had become Margaret's greatest investment. Inside her private study, she closed the heavy oak door behind her. Waiting there was Richard Hale, the family's chief financial officer. His face was pale. Margaret's confident smile disappeared. "Tell me." Richard opened a thick folder. "I delayed this meeting because I didn't want anyone overhearing." Margaret frowned. "Overhearing what?" He swallowed. "We have a serious problem." She crossed her arms. "How serious?" Richard slid several financial statements across the desk. "Our operating companies have been losing money for nearly 4 years." Margaret stared. "Impossible." "It isn't?" He pointed toward a page filled with numbers. "The estate's maintenance costs doubled. Our commercial properties are half vacant. The foundation has been borrowing against future donations." Margaret's breathing slowed. "What about the investment accounts?" Richard hesitated. "They're gone." Her voice sharpened. "Gone? We liquidated most of them 18 months ago." She slammed both hands onto the desk. "Without telling me? You approved the documents." "I don't remember approving anything." "You signed them during your European charity tour." Margaret's eyes widened. She remembered signing stacks of papers without reading them, trusting Richard completely. He wasn't finished. "Our largest problem isn't the investments." "What is?" "The mortgage." Margaret laughed. "The Whitmore estate has no mortgage." Richard slowly pushed forward another document. "It does now." Her smile vanished. 3 years earlier, the family had refinanced nearly every major asset to preserve appearances during an economic downturn. The mansion, their vineyards, office buildings, even heirloom land. Everything had become collateral. Margaret stared at the figure. Hundreds of millions. "Interest rates that climbed every quarter," she whispered. "We'll refinance again." Richard looked away. "No bank will extend additional credit. Someone will. They already know." "What do they know?" Richard's answer barely escaped his lips. "They know we're drowning." Silence filled the study. For the first time in decades, Margaret Whitmore looked afraid. Outside the study, Evelyn quietly walked past the closed door. She hadn't intended to listen, but one sentence slipped through before she reached the staircase. "If the lender calls the loan." She paused. "The Whitmore estate is finished." Evelyn continued walking without making a sound. Inside her bedroom, she opened a plain silver laptop. There were no family photographs on the desk. No expensive decorations. Only 4 monitors folded neatly into a compact workstation. She entered several encrypted passwords. Within seconds, charts flooded the screens. Currencies, bond markets, corporate debt, international exchanges. Billions of dollars moved every second. This wasn't a hobby. It was the hidden world Evelyn had built before anyone in the Whitmore family even knew what algorithmic trading was. By sunrise, one anonymous portfolio under her management would quietly earn more than the Whitmore Foundation raised in an entire year. No one in the mansion knew. Not Daniel. Not Margaret. Not even Richard. To them, Evelyn was simply the quiet daughter-in-law from a modest family. But as glowing market data reflected in her calm eyes, she opened a confidential report on one institution. Whitmore Legacy Bank. She frowned. Something about its balance sheet didn't make sense. Then she noticed one line hidden deep inside the filings. A line that made her heart beat slow instead of fast. Because hidden beneath thousands of pages of financial disclosures, someone was preparing for the Whitmore family's collapse. The first rays of dawn stretched across the skyline, but Evelyn had already been awake for hours. The rest of the Whitmore estate slept peacefully, unaware that their future was changing with every passing second. On her monitors, streams of numbers danced like living creatures. Bond prices flickered. Corporate debt changed hands. International markets opened one after another, each creating another opportunity invisible to ordinary investors. Evelyn wasn't chasing profit. She was following a trail. The balance sheet from Whitmore Legacy Bank refused to leave her mind. She enlarged the document. Every page looked ordinary. Every report had been signed. Every audit appeared clean. But hidden beneath the polished presentation was a pattern she recognized immediately. Someone was quietly moving the bank's worst loans into shell companies. Not to save the bank, to prepare it for collapse. She whispered to herself, "Who are you?" Another encrypted report appeared. Her proprietary software compared thousands of transactions completed over the last 18 months. A red notification flashed. 92% probability of coordinated debt restructuring. Evelyn leaned back. This wasn't incompetence. It was strategy. Someone powerful expected Whitmore Legacy Bank to fail. And when it did, someone intended to own everything, including the Whitmore family's mansion. She smiled slightly. Not if I get there first. Downstairs, breakfast was unusually quiet. Margaret entered wearing an ivory suit, as though nothing had happened the night before. The servants immediately stood straighter. Daniel looked exhausted. He had barely slept. "Evelyn," he said softly, "about yesterday." She smiled. "It's over." "No." He shook his head. "It isn't." Margaret buttered her toast without looking up. "It should be." Daniel frowned. "Mother." She calmly sipped her coffee. "I've spoken with our attorneys." Evelyn paused. "Our attorneys?" "Yes." Margaret finally met her eyes. "I believe it is time for you and Daniel to consider an amicable divorce." The room became silent. Daniel nearly dropped his coffee cup. "What?" Margaret continued as if discussing the weather. "The Whitmore name deserves stability." Daniel stood. "I love my wife." Margaret ignored him. "The divorce agreement is generous." She slid a thick envelope across the table. "You'll receive enough to return to wherever you came from." Evelyn didn't touch it. Margaret smiled. "You own very little, but every asset helps." Daniel stared. "Asset?" Margaret folded her hands. "Our family is experiencing temporary liquidity issues." Richard, sitting quietly nearby, suddenly coughed. Temporary. Even he knew that word had become a lie. Margaret continued, "If Evelyn signs today, the remaining funds can be redirected toward protecting this family." Daniel looked horrified. "You want to sell my marriage to pay your debts?" Margaret's face hardened. "I want to preserve generations of legacy." Evelyn calmly stood. "I'll review the documents." Daniel looked at her in disbelief. "Evelyn?" She gently touched his arm. "Trust me." Without another word, she walked away carrying the envelope. Margaret watched her leave with complete confidence. She believed victory was only paperwork away. Inside her office, Evelyn never opened the divorce agreement. Instead, she opened another document, Whitmore Legacy Bank. This time she requested restricted regulatory filings. Most people didn't even know they existed. Within seconds, confidential alerts appeared. Capital ratio below emergency threshold. Multiple commercial loan defaults. Regulatory monitoring intensified. Then came the sentence that changed everything. Potential resolution event under confidential review. Evelyn slowly removed her glasses. So it's true. The bank wasn't simply struggling. Federal regulators were preparing to intervene. Once that happened, distressed debt would flood the market. Most investors would panic. She wouldn't. She reached for an encrypted satellite phone. One number. No contact name. The call connected after one ring. A calm female voice answered. "Good morning. I want every distressed note tied to Whitmore Legacy Bank." "All of them?" "Every single one." "Using which entity?" Evelyn looked out the window toward the mansion. "The offshore holding company." There was a brief silence. "The one nobody knows belongs to you?" "Exactly." "What acquisition limit?" "No limit." The woman hesitated. "That could cost several $100 million." Evelyn smiled. So be it. The call ended. 3 countries away. Inside a sleek financial tower, overlooking the Atlantic Ocean, traders immediately began executing anonymous orders. No headlines appeared. No reporters noticed. No television analyst mentioned it. One forgotten commercial loan, purchased. Another distressed mortgage, purchased. Defaulted corporate bonds, purchased. Voting shares, purchased. Every hour, more invisible ownership shifted. No one realized every transaction pointed toward one destination, a company called Silver Horizon Capital Holdings. On paper, it had no face, no public executives, no interviews, no headquarters anyone could easily identify. Only one person possessed the controlling shares, Evelyn. Meanwhile, Margaret launched another attack. Preparations for the Whitmore Heritage Dinner had begun. It was the family's most prestigious annual event. Politicians, judges, business leaders, media personalities, everyone important would attend. Margaret addressed the event committee. This year's dinner will celebrate tradition, she paused, and new beginnings. Everyone understood what she meant. Daniel's divorce announcement. One socialite laughed. Finally removing the embarrassment, Margaret smiled. The family must move forward. Richard stood frozen near the back of the room. He wanted to speak. He wanted to warn her. Instead, fear kept him silent. Because another letter had arrived that morning. Not from regulators. From the family's primary lender. The loan had officially entered special monitoring. One missed payment. Everything could accelerate. That evening, Daniel found Evelyn sitting alone in the mansion's library. Stacks of financial books surrounded her. He sat beside her. "Tell me what's happening." She closed one book. "If I told you everything." He searched her face. "Would you believe me?" "Always?" She smiled sadly. "I don't think anyone has ever said that to me." "I mean it." He took her hand. "I know you're hiding something." She nodded. "I am." "Is it because of my mother?" "No." "The divorce?" "No." "Then what?" She looked into his eyes. "I'm trying to save your family." Daniel laughed quietly. "Not because it was funny, because it sounded impossible. My family needs billions of dollars. I know. You can't fix this alone." She squeezed his hand. "Maybe." He stared at her. For a moment, he almost asked the question, "Who are you really?" But before he could speak, his phone rang. It was Richard. Daniel answered immediately. Richard's voice shook. "You need to come to the estate office." "What happened?" "They're here." "Who?" "The bank." When Daniel arrived, 3 executives in dark suits stood inside the conference room. Their expressions revealed nothing. The lead executive opened a leather folder. "We're conducting a routine review." Margaret forced a smile. "Certainly." He looked directly at her. "We require updated collateral valuations." Margaret frowned. "For what purpose?" "I'm not authorized to discuss that." Richard quietly lowered his head. He already knew. The review wasn't routine. It was the first step before enforcement. Across the city, inside a glass skyscraper, another meeting was taking place. Senior executives at Whitmore Legacy Bank looked exhausted. The CEO loosened his tie. "Our liquidity position? Getting worse. Our institutional investors? Leaving. Our emergency funding? Denied." Silence filled the room. Finally, one director asked the question nobody wanted to hear. "Who's buying the debt?" No one answered. Because nobody knew. Every transaction disappeared behind layers of holding companies. One analyst finally spoke. "We've identified the acquiring entity." The CEO leaned forward. "Who?" "Silver Horizon Capital Holdings." "Who's behind it?" The analyst shook his head. "We can't find the beneficial owner." The room fell silent. Invisible investors were the most dangerous kind. Because they never sought attention. They sought control. Just after midnight, Evelyn's encrypted phone vibrated. A secure message appeared. Acquisition update. She opened it. Her eyes remained perfectly calm. Distressed debt acquired, 48%. Voting shares acquired, 31%. Mortgage exposure under control. Another line appeared seconds later. Projected majority ownership within 72 hours. For the first time in years, Evelyn allowed herself a slow smile. The woman Margaret believed she could erase with a divorce agreement was quietly becoming the most powerful creditor connected to the Whitmore empire. But before Evelyn could close the report, one final notification flashed across her screen. It wasn't about the bank. It wasn't about the debt. It was about someone inside the Whitmore family. A confidential internal investigation had uncovered evidence that the financial collapse wasn't caused by bad luck. Someone had been stealing from the family for years, and the first name in the sealed report made Evelyn's expression turn cold. Richard Hale. The grandfather clock in the Whitmore estate struck 6. Its deep chime echoed through halls that had witnessed generations of celebrations, weddings, victories, and whispered betrayals. This morning, the mansion felt different. The servants spoke in hushed voices. The gardeners avoided eye contact. Even the portraits hanging along the staircase seemed to watch in silence. Margaret Whitmore stood in her dressing room, fastening a pearl necklace with steady hands. Outwardly, she looked as composed as ever. Inside, panic was beginning to replace pride. 3 banks had refused her calls. 2 major investors had stopped answering entirely, and the family's attorneys had canceled their morning meeting with only one sentence. Circumstances have changed. Margaret stared at her reflection. No, she whispered. They need me. A knock interrupted her thoughts. Richard entered carrying another sealed envelope. His hands trembled. What is it now? He swallowed. The board has called an emergency meeting. Margaret nodded confidently. Finally, they've found a buyer. Richard hesitated. A buyer? The mysterious investment group. Margaret smiled for the first time in days. I knew someone intelligent would recognize the Whitmore name. She stood. They'll provide emergency financing. Richard didn't answer. He had already read the confidential documents. This wasn't a rescue. It was a takeover. But fear kept him silent. Across the city, the executive boardroom of Whitmore Legacy Bank buzzed with nervous conversations. Directors whispered. Lawyers organized thick binders. Financial advisors reviewed spreadsheets one final time. Every chair around the polished mahogany table was occupied except one, the chair reserved for the new controlling owner. Nobody knew who would walk through that door. One director leaned toward another. I heard it's a billionaire from Singapore. Another shook his head. No, a sovereign wealth fund. A third whispered, my source says it's an American hedge fund. The room fell quiet as the doors opened. Margaret entered first, with Daniel beside her. She carried herself like a queen entering her own palace. She believed she was about to negotiate, not surrender. Daniel glanced around the room. Something felt wrong. Nobody greeted his mother. Nobody rushed over to shake her hand. Instead, every executive kept looking toward the entrance, waiting. Then, the doors opened again. High heels clicked softly across the marble floor. 1, 2, 3. Every conversation stopped. Margaret slowly turned. Her confident smile disappeared. Evelyn walked into the room wearing a tailored navy business suit. Simple, elegant, powerful. Behind her came 6 attorneys, then 4 senior investment executives. Finally, 2 federal banking regulators. The chairman of the board immediately stood. So glad you've arrived, Madam Chair. Every executive rose to their feet, one after another. The room that had ignored Evelyn for years welcomed her with complete respect. Margaret frowned. There seems to be some mistake. The chairman smiled politely. There is no mistake. He turned toward Evelyn. Please, your seat. He gestured toward the empty chair at the head of the table. The chairperson's chair. Margaret laughed. This is absurd. Daniel looked from his mother to Evelyn. His heart pounded. Evelyn sat down calmly. She folded her hands. Let's begin. The lead attorney distributed identical folders around the room. Margaret opened hers confidently. Within seconds, the color drained from her face. What? Page after page carried official seals, purchase agreements, debt assignments, share transfer certificates, regulatory approvals, collateral ownership records. Every document pointed to the same conclusion. Silver Horizon Capital Holdings had legally acquired the controlling interest in Whitmore Legacy Bank. It now owned the majority of the distressed debt, including the Whitmore Estates mortgage. Margaret looked up. No, this isn't possible. Evelyn spoke softly. It became possible 72 hours ago. You bought the bank? I purchased the debt. The bank followed. Margaret's voice cracked. With whose money? My own. Silence exploded across the room. Daniel stared at his wife. You? You've always been... She nodded gently. I started investing before we met. Margaret shook her head violently. You're lying. Evelyn pressed a remote. A presentation appeared on the giant screen. Charts, trading records, audited financial statements, international compliance certificates, historical returns. The regulators confirmed every document. One regulator spoke clearly. Silver Horizon Capital Holdings has fully complied with all domestic and international banking regulations. Another added, the acquisition is lawful. There are no outstanding challenges. Margaret's hands began shaking. You planned this. Evelyn looked directly into her eyes. No, you did. The screen changed. A timeline appeared. 3 years of financial records, unauthorized transfers, luxury purchases, hidden consulting contracts, offshore payments. Richard closed his eyes. His secret had finally surfaced. Evelyn continued. The Whitmore family wasn't destroyed by market conditions. She clicked again. It was destroyed by greed. Every transfer highlighted Richard's signature. More than $180 million had quietly disappeared through shell companies. Margaret looked at him. You told me... Richard couldn't meet her eyes. I'm sorry. You said we were stable. I thought I could recover the losses. You stole from us. Tears filled his eyes. I kept borrowing to hide the first theft. Security officers entered. Richard didn't resist. As they escorted him away, he stopped beside Evelyn. You knew. She nodded. The moment I saw the balance sheet, Richard disappeared through the doors. The room remained silent. Margaret slowly stood. You still need my signature. Evelyn reached into her folder. I already have what I need. Another document slid across the table. Official foreclosure authorization. The payment default had matured overnight. Under the loan agreement, Silver Horizon now possessed every legal right to enforce its collateral. The mansion, the vineyards, commercial buildings. Everything. Margaret whispered, my home, Evelyn finished quietly, is now my responsibility. Margaret collapsed back into her chair. Years of pride disappeared in a single moment. She remembered every cruel word, every insult, every public humiliation, especially the charity dinner. She looked at Evelyn. You're taking revenge. Evelyn was silent for several seconds. Then she answered, no. If I wanted revenge, she looked around the room. I would invite every newspaper in the country. Nobody moved. Instead, she pushed another folder toward Margaret. Read page 12. Margaret opened it slowly. Her eyes widened. This? Evelyn nodded. It's an alternative. Instead of immediate foreclosure, instead of public bankruptcy, instead of selling everything, there was another option. I'll give your family a choice. Every person leaned forward. The first option. She paused. I enforce every legal right. The estate is auctioned. Your reputation disappears. Your family starts over with nothing. Nobody breathed. The second option, she continued calmly, You remain in the mansion, but not as owners, as caretakers. You'll live there. You'll maintain it. You'll learn how wealth is actually preserved. Margaret stared. You would let us stay? You built beautiful buildings, Evelyn replied. But you forgot how to build decent people. Daniel looked at his wife with tears in his eyes. Why? She smiled sadly. Because mercy teaches lessons that humiliation never can. Weeks later, the newspapers carried one astonishing headline. Local investor saves historic bank from collapse. The article praised the anonymous owner who had prevented thousands of families from losing their homes. Only a handful of people knew that investor's true identity. Whitmore Legacy Bank changed completely. Executive bonuses disappeared. Predatory lending programs ended. New financial literacy centers opened in underserved neighborhoods. Small business loans became easier to obtain. Scholarship funds replaced extravagant charity galas. For the first time, the bank's profits grew alongside its reputation. Not because it exploited struggling families, but because it served them honestly. The Whitmore mansion also changed. The extravagant parties ended. The servants received fair wages. Unused rooms became community meeting spaces. The gardens hosted free educational programs for local children. Margaret still lived there, but every morning she walked past a simple bronze plaque near the entrance. It read, "True wealth is measured by the lives we improve, not the people we impress." She had suggested removing it many times. Evelyn never agreed. One quiet evening, Daniel found Evelyn standing on the mansion's balcony watching the sunset. "You could have taken everything." She smiled. "I did." He looked confused. She turned toward him. "I took the fear. I took the lies. I took the arrogance. What remained?" She looked toward the families enjoying the gardens below. "Was worth keeping." Daniel wrapped his arm around her. "You know," he laughed softly, "my mother still can't believe she underestimated you." Evelyn smiled. She wasn't the only one. Below them, children laughed as they ran across the lawn that had once been reserved for the wealthy elite. The mansion no longer stood as a monument to pride. It had become a symbol of second chances. Because Evelyn had proven something no amount of inherited wealth could ever buy. Money can build an empire. Power can protect a name. But only character can leave a legacy that survives long after the fortune is gone. If this story kept you hooked until the very end, don't forget to like the video, subscribe to the channel, and turn on notifications so you never miss another unforgettable story of betrayal, justice, and extraordinary redemption. And tell us in the comments, what would you have done if you were Evelyn, taken everything, or offered mercy? Your answer might surprise someone else reading it.